Hi there, Parker Elmore here at Odyssey Advisors. A question we hear all the time from OPEB plan sponsors is, what are the assumptions that you guys as actuaries use to calculate my OPEB liability? It's one of the largest items on my balance sheet. I'd like to understand a little bit more about what goes into it, what's driving all these numbers. There's several key elements to go into this: the data, the census, the claims, the contributions, the OPEB trust, the assumptions. How long do people live? How long do they stay employed? Are they likely to retire? If so, are they likely to take benefits? How much do healthcare costs go up every year? And the plan specifications, what are the benefits they can actually take at retirement? Is Medicare involved? How much do they pay for coverage? So the assumptions themselves, these are the key thing we're going to talk about here today. The discount rate, that's the interest rate used to bring all the liabilities back to today, all the future payments that are going to happen under the plan. If you have an OPEB trust, how much is that going to earn each year on average? Do we expect that to do? Healthcare costs, what are they today? How much are they going to go up in the future, which is the inflation? How does aging impact that? Obviously, older people in general use more healthcare costs. Mortality rates, how long am I going to live? Termination rates, what's the likelihood I stay employed for a given year? Disability rates, what's the likelihood I disable or don't become disabled in a given year? Assuming I'm eligible to retire, what's the probability I actually elect to retire in a given year? If I elect to retire, what's the likelihood I actually participate or elect to take benefits in retirement? And then how does Medicare get involved? So the discount rate, if you're an unfunded plan, which is many of you, that means you don't have an OPEB trust, it's going to be based on the 20-year high-grade municipal bond index. So whatever those rates are, if you're fully funded or materially funded, you're going to use the long-term rate of return on your OPEB trust assets. For many of you, most of you, you're going to have a blended rate in between those two figures. So how that gets blended is really based on 5 key factors. One of those is the current level of OPEB trust assets. Then there's the future benefit payments. Each and every year we have to project those out. The contributions, the funding policy, how much you're going to set aside each year. Then there's the investment allocations. How does that money allocated? Is it in stocks, bonds, equities, cash? You tell me. And then the municipal bond index rate that we just spoke about. How do those all interact with each other? That long-term rate of return assumption. How do we develop that? Well, it's based on your asset allocation, your target asset allocation. And we're going to look at the expected future rates of return in real terms, net of inflation by asset class. We blend those together with your allocation to come up with an overall real rate of return. And then we'll factor in the assumed future inflation assumption to create a nominal rate of return that we can use. Healthcare costs, what are they today? We're going to look at your current premiums or claims. We're going to take out any children type claims. We're going to adjust this for age and gender, because those premiums that you have are largely based on an active population with some retirees. We need to create a retiree only claim or retiree only premium. Then we have to take that and adjust it by age and by gender. And then we need to impact Medicare. How does Medicare factor in if indeed your plan integrates with Medicare or your benefits go past Medicare eligibility? How much are these costs going to go up every year? You guys have been around long enough. You've seen these plans, and healthcare costs have generally gone up a lot over the years. We are going to forecast this out potentially for 100 years. Your 20-year-old employee you hire today can potentially work until retirement, take the benefits and for the rest of their life, which could go to 120 in theory. There's a lot of different approaches. Those who've been doing this for a long time would know this. We have flat rates of return. We assume it goes up by 5% a year from now until the end of time. We grade it down over time. We say it's going to start at 10% and grade down to some number like a 4 or a 5 over time. In a model we see now is something called the Gets-In Trend model, which tries to reflect in healthcare costs as a percentage of GDP, when that might hit certain constraints or limits, and how we phase into that number. So that's a model we see now. Aging. In general, older people use more healthcare costs than younger people. Obviously, your mileage may vary, but that's what we see. So we need to age that out over time. Different people have a higher slope or different slope on that aging curve, and that will vary by age and by gender. So mortality rates, how long are you going to live? We hear all the time, well, the average age that somebody's going to live is 85. That's great. It's also not relevant, because what I care about is if you're currently 63 years old today, what's the probability you make it to 64 and then to 65 and so on. So if you're 65 years old today and you're healthy, there's a very good chance you're going to make it to 90, perhaps 95. So mortality rates vary by age. Employment status, are you currently working or retired? A 64-year-old active employee is going to live longer in general than a 64-year-old retired individual. Gender, males and females. Occupation, certain jobs are higher risk and therefore have higher mortality. And then obviously health status, disabled people in general have higher mortality in a given year than healthy people. Also, generational improvements. What I mean by that is healthcare costs have gone up over time. But then again, mortality has also improved over time. What I mean by that is, if you're looking at 1950, for example, your probability of death was much higher at a given age than it is today. What will it be in the year 2150, let's say? We need to factor that in. So our models will factor that in. Termination rates. So you're working for me today. What's the probability you're going to work for me again next year? That's going to vary based on how old you are today, how long you've been with me, what your occupation is, and what your gender is. Disability rates. So it's wonderful that you're here today, but what's the probability you become disabled in a given year? That's going to vary based on your current age, what occupation you're in. Certain jobs are more high risk than others, are more likely to become disabled, and gender. Retirement rates. Obviously, I've made it all the way to retirement age. I've got through all this stuff. I worked all these years. I'm now eligible to retire. What's the probability I elect in any given year? Certain years we see spikes which are 55, 62, and 65, but I can retire any of the years when I am eligible. What are the probabilities of each? We often see it varies based on service. Longer service people are generally more likely to retire than shorter service people, simply because they've been there for longer and have more money, or if they have a pension benefit, that will also be higher. Occupation factors in. Certain occupations allow people to go out earlier, and they do. Gender as well will also impact things. So now I've decided I've made it there. I've actually retired. What's the probability I'll actually elect to take your benefits? You're probably going to charge me something for those benefits, whether it's 10%, 20%, 50%. How likely am I to take it? How likely am I to cover a spouse if that's allowed? And is that a one-time thing, or can I revisit it every year, much like open enrollment in your healthcare plan? Medicare, probably the biggest issue in an OPEB plan. Does your plan integrate with Medicare? If it does, how is that done? And then more importantly, is your retiree even eligible for Medicare? Now, many of you say, of course I'm eligible for Medicare. Who wouldn't be? Well, for example, if you were a teacher hired before 1986, there's a good chance you've never paid into the system, and therefore you're not eligible for Medicare. Now, you as an employer could decide to buy them into Medicare. That's a subject for another webinar, and we have that out there. And if you have questions, certainly reach out to us. It's expensive, but it may be a very good option for you folks to reduce your costs. So the summary, there's a lot of things here. I acknowledge that. It's quick, it's dirty, we get that. But I want to give you a brief overview of how this all comes together. Data is the most important element. So that's census information. Who are all the people? That's what really drives everything. But, the assumptions matter too. The discount rate. How do I bring all those future costs back to today? How much do healthcare costs go up every year? Is the plan integrated with Medicare? When do I retire? So there's a lot of pieces there, and we recognize that. I know it's complicated, and I know we went through it quickly, but if you have questions on any of it, reach out to myself or any Odyssey consultant. We're here to help. Thank you for taking the time, and we wish you a wonderful day.